Excuse me. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Thanks for joining me. Michael D. Shaw is here in house, as would be the habit of every Wednesday now at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Mike is he's a medical writer and author. He keeps some interesting blogs that are published at various sites. Political commentator. Mike, thanks for joining me.
Well, I have to ask you, you being a Boston guy, is Wednesday still Prince Spaghetti Day?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In the North End.
Yeah,
Anthony Furman, what was it? Anthony Furman Getty, I believe his name was.
yeah, he just died
He
recently.
did? I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
yeah, 63 years old. I
I
just
mean,
happened to read. I happened to read the obit. You get older and you start reading those things. A little.
right. I hope he didn't die of the virus.
No, no, no. They're not sure what the cause was, but one of the sort of bittersweet things was apparently, and I never saw it, but they redid the commercial, years later.
Hmm.
And this kid is running through the North End,
Yeah,
and
of
then it
course.
ends with him coming to what was billed as the original guy, but it wasn't. They didn't use Anthony
Oh,
as the guy. So
oh, Anthony Furlan-Getty, I believe his name is.
uh,
Yeah, that was a very powerful commercial, and it showed some great visuals of the North End, and it still looks the same in many ways.
yeah, it
And
got a little gentrified from when I lived there, but
actually, it's a lot of young single professional women live in
hmm,
the North End, and they still have the old Italian grandfathers though sitting on the front stoop, keeping an eye on the neighborhood. So it's kind of an interesting symbiosis, I guess you might say there.
yeah, yeah, it was a safe neighborhood when I was living there in the early '70s.
Yeah.
There was no petty crime. There was actually a mob hit next door to where we
Oh,
lived.
those are the old days. I mean, they're gone.
Yeah,
That's the last of the Mohicans. The Cheese Man passed. He passed away a few years ago, and
yeah,
that was it. But yeah, that's a whole saga. I remember that was the Boston I grew up in. Between them and the Irish mob of Whitey Bulger
oh yeah.
and the Winter Hill gang, those people ran Boston. I mean, that's gone. That's a those are days in the past.
Well, that's good
Um,
to know.
yeah.
So,
So
so what? One of the things that was on my mind
yeah,
was this Kyle Rittenhouse business,
yeah. I want to
where
talk about that. It's something that the liberals are getting all twisted over. I guess because first of all, it's the only case that we know of on record where these terrorists and these killers are not liberal left leaning parts of organizations that are supported by the Democrats. That the guy is being portrayed as a Trump supporter. So that's big news. But what actually happened with that? I mean, we don't know, and
well,
this, yeah,
okay, what I was going to say is that if you go on various sites, Mark Dice and many, many others,
yeah,
uh, you can see there's a lot of video on this event, and it's absolutely clear that it was self-defense. Uh, I mean, it's not even a question
hmm,
remotely. And the attorney that took on his case said it's 100% self-defense. There's not a court in the world that would convict the guy. But what's keeping people less informed is if you try to post anything on YouTube or any of the social media sites that's even remotely in defense of this kid, it immediately gets pulled down.
yeah. So let's be careful because the commissars who are running my show here might pull this show down if we don't speak in
Right.
careful terms.
Yeah, we'll speak in careful terms.
We'll have to use euphemisms here because I mean, I'll wake up in the morning and find the whole show's been pulled down.
Yeah,
And by the way, if it is pulled down, I should mention to my listeners
that it was my
that
fault. Yeah.
that's okay. I mean, we don't, you can't, the ground shifts pretty regularly. We don't know
Yeah.
what could happen, and we have to try to be truthful. But if this show is pulled down, and if you come to the station and find that it's been removed, the show is on Podomatic, and from Podomatic, I am on about 6 or 7 different platforms, including iHeart and iTunes and Spotify and
Oh, okay.
Stitcher, all these other platforms where I actually have a bigger audience anyway than YouTube. Um, and it'll be harder for them to pull me off of Podomatic because I pay for it. It's a subscription. So, and plus I store everything. So, I'm trying to take precautions in the event that they pull the program down. And given the broadening of numbers of things you can't talk about, I think it's very likely it probably will be pulled down sometime before the election. I mean, just this week, not on YouTube but on Twitter, they pulled down and canceled and several major Twitter accounts because these people quoted information that they directly took off of the website of the Centers for Disease Control. Now, we can talk about that. I don't even know what it is that they published, but it's gotten that bad. I mean, we're talking about an approved government website that they repeated, and you can't do that. But getting back to the Rittenhouse story,
Right.
um, first of all, I mean, I've learned, and I always knew this anyway, but it was really driven home to me that in cases like this, we have to be very careful to not come to conclusions. And I learned this from the Trayvon Martin case.
Oh, yeah.
The initial rush to judgment, which was, that this white guy went, and shot an innocent black man who was simply walking, trespassing on his territory. It really wasn't what happened. And so you have to realize that the way these things are portrayed is it's agenda driven. It is driven by the dominant media, which has an agenda, and it is driven to fit a narrative to the point where, in the case of Trayvon Martin, they actually doctored a police tape to make it look a certain way. So I take that very jaundiced view ever since,
Oh,
and
yeah.
especially in cases like this, which fit into a certain narrative and which can be used to stoke hysteria and rage and emotion against whoever they're targeting, and in this case, obviously, that would be President Trump. So, what do we? You're pointing out that this was a case of self-defense based on the video at the time. I mean, I wonder, and maybe I'm getting a little bit into devil's advocate here, but what was he doing walking, coming into Kenosha with an AR-15 rifle, a 16-year-old kid walking around?
Okay. He was, as I understand it, he's from Illinois, but he had a job in Kenosha as, I believe, a lifeguard. So
Mm-hmm.
he was there legitimately. And then he was called in by a group of friends to help defend a friend's, I guess, parents' business that was under attack.
Okay.
And without going into detail, uh, the scenario seems to unfold that he was harassed back and forth and so on. He starts running away, is shot at, then falls on the ground. There's a few people around him, and it just came down to defending himself. So,
Mm-hmm.
and there was, accompanying calls to kill him and whatnot. But I think the bigger question I have is, to what end is the narrative portrayed, especially when inevitably the truth gets out? So do the media then say, "Oh, gee, just kidding. We wanted to get more clicks"? At what point are they responsible for what's
Well,
going
they're
on?
running this thing. I mean, I flick onto MSNBC and CNN. I mean, this is probably at least half of what they're talking about, and they're holding it up as an example of violent Trump supporters. They finally have one that they think they can mold in that image, even though, and then they're going to shift that to blaming Trump for all of the leftist rioting and looting that's going on. And also they called him a white supremacist, which is absolutely false. First of all, the two people he shot happened to be white, but there's just no evidence of that. And they're just putting in all these lies, and they're going to create this story, and they're getting people whipped up, pushing their base, which is predominantly liberal suburban women. That's the group, and looking at this and being, oh my God, this is Trump is responsible.
Well, let's look at that for a second. It's funny you mentioned liberal suburban women
Hmm.
because some years ago, you may be familiar with the case of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle,
Hmm.
who was maligned uh, in the Hearst newspaper
Right.
of violating this supposedly young starlet and so on and so forth. It
Hmm.
ended up that was completely untrue and was done to literally in those days sell newspapers. And when it came out, uh, Hearst never apologized to Roscoe Arbuckle, who lost his career over it.
Hmm.
Um, and that was just part of how things were done. And I think even back then, you mentioned this female angle. I think even back then, that was really what they were going after. Uh, it turns out that this young starlet was far from some virginal victim,
Mm.
uh, and uh, but this created a firestorm, and it was all completely BS. Uh, and it was picked up by the prosecuting DA actually, who was trying to use this as a reelection issue. So the media has never, as far as I know, and you're a bigger student on this than I am, has never had to pay the price for anything that they've done like this. And there have been multiple instances uh, where people, innocent people, have gotten hurt
Oh
based
yeah,
on
I mean they'll
this.
craft a story to fit whatever political narrative is going at that time. I've seen this firsthand. Even when I ran for office, I saw this. I mean, there were things that were written about and said that were completely false, but I wasn't in a position to dispute it, and I saw it happen to other people as well, both on the plus and the minus. And it's almost like they're fable tellers. I mean, it goes back to the ancient Greek sophists who were professional liars. I mean, that's what they did. Aristotle and Socrates and Plato were critical of them in writing. It was this movement in Athens where they would be hired by people, usually people with a lot of money, to go out and lie for them and either by building up their image or by discounting anything negative that was happening. And some say that they are the origin of the modern lawyer, but that's another story. But that's what the media is. I mean, it's a lot of it is marketing. I mean, this is how to promote something in a way that fits what they're trying to do. Now, the one of the most obvious and most idiotic attempt right now, and I would hope that people see this, is the fact that after over a month, I think it's been almost 2 months now, of radicals, Antifa, BLM, burning black neighborhoods, looting black businesses, killing black people, and with the calls for the defunding of police leading to an uptick in crime and killing. That's what everything that had to do with Kenosha, by the way. Now, all of a sudden, as they're tanking in the polls, they're coming out and condemning it. Suddenly, you have Biden coming out of his basement and condemning this because they're starting to see that they're going south in the polls. And not only are they condemning it, but they're engaging in this very, very ugly attack by trying to turn the tables and say that the whole thing is Trump's fault, as if somehow Antifa and BLM, these people are Trump supporters. I don't think so, but it's Trump's fault because of the milieu. They always talk
Yes.
about the milieu, and right, and because of the atmosphere and the cerebellum is talking to the cerebrum. And we have these these phony intellectuals with their phony British accents on Channel 2. Oh, it's the the movement and the the support in this crap, and they try to make this case that somehow Trump's responsible. I even remember this happened when you had a guy go out and open fire at the Republican baseball game in Washington,
Oh yeah,
shooting Congressman Steve Scalise. Somehow this was Trump's fault, right? This
because
Bernie
he
Sanders supporter.
created the
He
atmosphere.
created this milieu. Exactly. So that's what it is, so despicable, but that is the narrative that they're now working on.
Well, there are a number of people, I guess, who have an unshakable worldview, and you have to keep feeding this narrative. And it's amazing how few of them get off this worldview, no matter what the evidence is. Uh, in fact, I just got a phone call today. I won't tell you from whom, but it surprised even me, because I'd always thought this guy was reasonably conservative. Calls me up, Mike, it finally happened. I registered as a Republican. I was hoping the Democrats would change, but I finally gave up on them. And I'm thinking to myself, finally? What was it? You know, but then it occurred to me that there's people that are just, as Larry Elder calls, toe tag Democrats, that it doesn't really matter because they, but I often compare this to sports teams. And this is kind of a funny story, but you'll see what the point is. A number of years ago, we were at a parents' weekend for when my son was in University of Arizona, and we happened to meet an older couple that was wearing all the purple University of Washington garb, and they came from some money apparently. And he told me that he has never missed a home or away game for the University of Washington since the early 1950s or whatever it was. So I don't know what got into me, but I looked at the guy and said, let me ask you something. How does the team in 1950 compare with, frankly, in some cases, a bunch of gangbangers who are on the current Washington Husky team? I mean, what is it that you're following? Is it just the logo? I mean, and you've been out of the school for so many years, what's the identity? And then I realized I'd probably gone too far, because it was a guy that was like shattered. He had never thought of this before.
Huh.
He was just mindlessly going along with this. And I wasn't doing it to be mean. I was just very puzzled, because in my case, I was a student at UCLA during the glory days, when they went, what was it, 88-2, when Lou Alcindor, now Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, was on the team. And everybody's excited and so on and so forth. But they would use that as an alumni recruiting thing for decades, even though the team at this point sucks. It has nothing to do with that. John Wooden isn't the coach. He was frankly very lucky and overrated. That's another story. And I just don't get it, that people keep this same thing they can cling to. Why? Because if they switch to Republicans, they have to admit they were wrong.
They're bitter clingers.
Bitter, yeah. I never heard it used that way, but okay.
Yeah, right. I mean, you know what I mean, with guns and God and gold. That was a comment that Obama made early in his campaign.
Well, I mean,
about middle America, but no, I mean, I'm using that in an inverse sense. I mean, it's a religion. These are, you invest into something from an early age, and you spend your life invested in it. You don't want to have to change that. You don't want to have to look at it and maybe admit that something is wrong or something has changed, and it kind of, you feel that it might devalue a whole part of your life. I think that that's part of this loyalty to the Democratic Party and the hatred for this irrational and utterly incomprehensible hatred for Trump. They don't know why they hate Trump. It's tribal. It's almost like it's like a herd mentality. This is people traveling in a wolf pack. And there are rewards for that. The rewards are that you get to be among the beautiful people. You get to rub shoulders with beautiful women, right? You get better dates. Let's face it. I mean, you get favors when you're in college, and you get award. You get people give you awards. I mean, I've been doing radio in various capacities for probably the better part of 20 years. If I had been a liberal and I had genuflected to the left, I'd probably have a bunch of awards on my table, right? I'd probably have made a good bit of money. I probably would, have had my face on the cover of magazines. I mean, Obama's face was put on the cover of almost 30 magazines even before he was elected. Trump never, and the only time he is a demon. I mean, they turn him into some kind of an animal. I mean, do you know that Melania Trump has never been interviewed by a major magazine? It's the first time since Martha Washington it is. Every first lady gets an interview. There's somebody goes to the White House. They talk about the kind of food she serves. They talk about how she combs her hair, her fashion. And never and Melania Trump is probably one of the most, if the not the most beautiful woman to ever be first lady. And she has never received any of that.
Well, if you contrast that with the cult that was created over Jackie Kennedy.
Oh yeah, but the thing is that to a degree has been the case with every first lady.
Yeah, yeah.
They get at least some kind of a nice softball, the family life, and they get to talk about, their family and their husband. Never has Melania Trump gotten that, and nothing but brickbats. Now she has this horrible former friend, doing a book about her, spilling the beans on private conversations. I mean, that's what the Trumps get. I mean, it's just and she's put on and she's the one that gets all the major television.
I think the hatred for Trump stems from it's not really as partisan as you might think. I think here's a guy coming in who's outside the system. And as somebody, I've never been in politics, you have, but I've been involved with dealing with the federal government for over 40 years. And the system is so corrupt and incompetent, but if you're part of it, it's a lifetime cushy job with various rewards. I mean, certainly back in the day, people were retiring with nearly full pension. It's been dropped a little bit now, but all you had to do was just get along. And there were people that did. There were people who were stunningly incompetent, like a Tony Fauci, who are able to build this in to an empire. And I could tell you stories for the next 24 hours straight about things that go on in agencies. So now here's a guy who doesn't have any of this. He's coming in and starting to upset the apple cart. And Democrats and Republicans can join hands in condemning this guy because he's not going to completely upset the system, but he's going to finally expose it to the light of day. And this is why, as you mentioned, the CDC business, this is why you can't even post what's on their website because it betrays how incompetent they are. And somehow you're not supposed to know that. Right. So that's exactly what's going on. And that's where
that's what this country was supposed to, how we set up a government to reject, because that's, in a sense, that's natural. That's been going on in every government since the beginning of time. I mean, you get an establishment which becomes fat and lazy, and they start putting their fat and lazy friends in power, and it becomes this sort of, it breeds a culture of corruption and of falseness. And the reason our founding fathers came up with the brilliant idea of dividing government and creating a balance of powers where they would compete against each other in a reflection of what exists in nature, by the way. They were hoping that each side would beat up on the other side and power would be diffused. And now, you have a situation with Trump who I think it's happened before in American history. I mean, I think Andrew Jackson was that kind of a figure.
Yeah.
Lincoln, I think, was that kind of a figure. I mean, where you have somebody come in and they sweep out the old and they kind of, bring in a new way of thinking, for better or for worse, I may point out.
Yeah. Well,
Worse in the case of Wilson. But, he comes in there and as an outsider and he does this. And yeah, you have an alliance of the Democrats and the old guard Republicans, the Bushes, and, them all trying to stop him and literally trying to stop him,
yeah.
trying to overthrow the government, basically, and doing so apparently, quite deliberately and on the verge of treasonously. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a case in American history where an incoming president has had the loyal opposition, which is fine, literally plotting to undermine his administration. I mean, Obama put people throughout the federal branch of government, throughout the executive branch, who would literally work against Trump from the inside. That's what happened. This was
Yes.
exposed during the phony, perfect phone call scandal, right? The impeachment scandal, where you had people like the Vindeman brothers and others who had been put in there by Obama in the final months of his administration, coming out and, calling for Trump's impeachment because they didn't like him. They didn't have anything on him. They didn't like his foreign policy, so they gave testimony. I mean, this is the kind of thing that I don't think has ever happened before to an incoming administration. We're supposed to be opposed. I mean, when Obama came in, he had opposition. I was opposed to most of his ideas. That's fine. That's the American way. But to put people into I mean, he was elected, and to put people in to deliberately sabotage his presidency, I don't think that's ever happened before in American history, as far as I know.
Well, not to the extent that it happened now. I mean, even the only other president, and it's not even comparable. While Roosevelt, FDR had substantial media support, there were certain papers that despised him.
Yeah, but he didn't have. I mean,
no, he was able to get away with a lot, but he was
maybe.
not.
But my
He was
point
not
is,
interested.
yeah, but his predecessor, Herbert Hoover, he retired, and the Republicans opposed him. He didn't put people
No.
thread people into the administration that would, falsify documents so they could spy on him and file cases before a court that would give them permission to eavesdrop and bring spies from foreign countries in to create phony documents. I mean, you were the loyal opposition. Roosevelt was elected and he was the president and he was allowed to function as such.
Right.
I think every president has had that kind of understanding. That's, this is the first time that you've had an administration facing enemies from the inside who were literally trying to hobble, if not remove, that administration.
Okay, but I mean, there's some reasons for that. You had the compliant media. You had the fact that although this was well known to people who know how the government works, the Justice Department has been terrible for at least 2 decades. But it took this long for it to get to the point that it could be corrupted. I mean, it's one thing for Obama to want to corrupt people, but for people to willingly go along, as McCabe and others did, and Comey, a lot of this was just in place. It was just convenient. And the catalyst was that now we have a guy we can really hate because he's trying to upset all this. And, for the average less informed, but maybe a goodwill person who doesn't know how screwed up it is, they're shocked by this. And yeah, it is unprecedented in that sense, but it's the first time that people so demonstrably evil have all been together in one place and thinking that they're so right about everything.
And still do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still arrogant. I mean, this constitutes, by any standard, a conspiracy. And in a way, it's the classic conspiracy because what they did was cook up a conspiracy theory against their opponent by claiming that President Trump was a Russian spy
Yeah.
and that the media was completely complicit in it, fully conscious, fully aware that they were playing this role. We could talk about the obvious suspects like Rachel Maddow and others, but really the mainstream. If you look at Lester Holt, I mean, in the mainstream big networks, it's but basically the same thing. I mean, they are conspiring to undermine the administration, not with legitimate criticism of policies, which they won't do because they'd lose, but with things like spending a big piece of a segment of the national news, 6 o'clock news, which is still very influential, talking about the fact that President Trump ordered an extra scoop of ice cream at a state dinner, right? As if this is something horrible. I mean, it's that crazy. I mean, and they just cook up one phony thing after another. I mean, I don't know. The latest is that President Trump and Melania didn't hold his hand when they were coming off an airplane. Oh, she must hate him, right? And
Oh
what
yeah,
else?
yeah, I remember that.
I mean, this is news. I mean, this is what they're pushing. I mean, there's a recent one. What is the latest one? It's one of the worst. I mean, I can't even remember it right now, but it was so ridiculous.
Well, what's the audience though for this kind of thing?
I think it's still a big. I think they still capture a big mainstream audience. That's the problem because most people don't pay attention to what we're doing here or news, alternative news. They still look at the three big networks to get their news because they're out there working all day. People are out paying 40% of their income in taxes. They got to, they come home and they're tired and they want to have a quick synopsis of the news in a quick half hour with sound bites. And so they still tune into the big three, as it were. And those big three are basically doing, if you flip the dial between the three of them, they're essentially doing the same exact stories. And they're all negative about Trump. They would rarely say anything positive about the administration. I mean, people have no idea. I learned a lot. I don't even know I mean, I know that I understand that conventions tend to emphasize and embellish on the positive and discount the negative. I get that. They all do it. But even in that context, I learned about a lot of things that the Trump administration has done over the past 3 years that I didn't know about because there's no way of getting that information. that was an Trump had the opportunity to come out and talk about these things, and the media couldn't ignore it. And we found out a lot of things that Trump has accomplished in the past 3 or 4 years that we did not even know about because they never bothered to report it.
Well, let's switch gears to
Sure.
what happened to critical thinking skills. You think the average person who's watching the three networks just accepts everything? Do people accept everything that's told them all the time?
Yes, I mean, I think that it's not even a conscious thing. I mean, when you look at the major, especially television, it's still hugely influential. You're sitting there. The old term, you're a couch potato.
Yeah.
You're a receptacle. You're sitting there and you're receiving information. It goes right into your mind, into your subconscious. And I don't know if it's so much that people are actively accepting it or not, but I think it's sort of a case of mild hypnotism and information deprivation. You're not getting an in-depth analysis. You're not getting the real news, and so you basically just receive the news at some level. You may mildly be disgruntled over it and be like, but you just sort of accept it passively. And I think that you talk about the drop in attention span and the drop of cohesive cognitive ability. I think that's something that's happening across the board in this country. I think it was a while back. I was visiting a relative, and they had a copy of an old Time magazine on the table,
Hmm.
going back I think to the '60s. And I flipped through that, and it was pretty in depth, right? They would go on for about 7 or 8, 9 pages, maybe even 15. I think it was 10 or 15 pages on a topic, and you really got a whole picture. Sure, it had its biases, but it was based upon the assumption that people back then had a greater intellect. They had a lot longer attention span. If you look at Time magazine today, it's little sound bites, little clips of information, all kind of unrelated to each other, very undigested, very unanalyzed, um, and I think that that's what's happened to our attention span. Um, One of the things I think that's an example of that, and what I actually would blame for that, was the advent of MTV.
Oh yeah, with the quick cuts.
Right? Quick cuts, as in they would flash up to 40, 50 images in the matter of a minute,
Yeah.
or a minute or two. And it would all be like bing bong, and it would be not necessarily things that were related to each other either. I mean, they would intersperse between 2 or 3 different scenarios, and some of it didn't even connect to anything. It would just be this. It's almost like, I think it has an effect, and I would imagine that this is something that has been studied by psychologists and social scientists, and deliberately created like that. I mean, psychology in a way is the whole art and science of psychology. Not to put down the idea that we should understand the psyche, but it has always been something that's been employed in the business of mind control, I think.
Okay, but even going back to uh, before all that exists, did you notice as a child, because I did, that there were some people, some kids, just uncritically accepted whatever was told them?
Yes.
I mean, I'm not saying to disagree with everything, but there'd be this mindless adherence to whatever authority says all the time, even if it made no sense. Is it because what, they were lazy? They were scared? What's
Yeah.
the
I mean,
explanation for
I've
that?
noticed the same thing. I think that there always are going to be people like that. It's this desire to conform, this desire, as I talked about earlier, to be one of the beautiful people,
Right.
right? It's the path of least resistance. It is, I mean, I suppose it's laziness, but on the other hand, when you're going to a college, for example, and your parents are spending 50 grand a year, you don't want to make waves. It's so much easier to go with the flow, to go with whatever the predominant way of being is and way of thinking is. And I think that people don't necessarily make that decision consciously. I think it might be just that they learn to keep their head low and internalize. And, a lot of it is done because of the intimidation of the establishment, the award, the carrot and the stick. If you play ball, you get the awards, you get to get invited to the cool parties, and you get to be with the cool people. But if you don't play ball, they hold up examples of what can happen. You can see people. There's always someone who is singled out and vilified and ostracized and abused. And then you look at that and you're like, oh my God, I don't want that to be me. I don't want that. I could hurt. It could ruin me. It could ruin my reputation. I could end up, you know, losing my place at this expensive college. I don't know, whatever.
Well, did you have to, before your daughter went into college, did you have to admonish her that she might be hearing things that
Yes.
are biased and radical and so on?
Yes, of course. I mean, you try to, when your children are young, you try to inoculate them as best you can.
Yeah.
But they have to play ball. They have to be in the real world. I understand that. I think that you make compromises. I've made compromises. In a way, we all do. I mean, we have to be able to function. So the establishment has enormous power, and when you cross it, at least if you do it too vociferously. And by the way, I would include in this people on the far left who also are outside of the main establishment. It's not just
Yeah.
even a liberal conservative thing. If you cross the predominant view, you can get in big trouble. And the louder you are, the more trouble you can get in. And you can be hated. Nobody wants that. We all want to be loved. It's not right. It's not easy to do to do that. I mean, it's I'm in a better position to do it, but even in this position, I've had to change my name, as you know. I mean, there's
Yeah.
things I've had to do to protect my family from me, and also, because they don't necessarily agree with me. Um, so that you have to kind of to function in this world without conforming to the norm is a very tricky business, and that's what I think that's partially, or at least mostly, actually, why they despise Trump, because there's no rational reason for their hatred. He's been a pretty successful president on all levels. There's no, there's nothing you can actually point to, and if you ask them, they can't really
No,
articulate anything
yeah.
in particular.
But somehow it doesn't matter because it's just the milieu, as you
The
say.
milieu, that's right.
What's the cure for this?
The cure for it is people like President Trump and people like you and I, and you step up to the bat. It only takes one person to. It's like the great Hans Christian Andersen story. The emperor has no clothes, right?
Yeah,
The young kid at the parade suddenly looks up and says, "He's naked. He's got no clothes." And all of a sudden, everybody's the eyes, the scales fall from the eyes, and everyone's like, "You're right." And the charade's over. In other words, they're going to craft the reality that we think is true, but when you put a little pin in it and expose it, everything falls off, and you see the truth. And this is what Jesus did, right? I mean, look, I'm not Christian, but I think Jesus was probably, if not the most important man to ever live, because he pierced into the establishment of his day, and he called them out, and he pointed to the falseness of their activities and their beliefs, and he got in a lot of trouble for it, as we know,
yeah.
right? So that's an example. I mean, there are other examples in history. There are examples all the time, and that's what it takes. It just takes one person to stand up, and when that one person gets knocked down, maybe that one person would have woken up a few other people, and they go up and they take a swing at the base too.
So it's really that long term of a process,
Well, it's an
or is
ongoing
it one of
process.
these tipping point things where it builds up and then suddenly people read,
Suddenly
my
the whole
God,
yeah,
I've
the
been an
whole
idiot
deck of
for
cards gets blown down. Something catastrophic happens, or something, and it's never something that's going to be solved. It's an ongoing problem because it's the corruption of power, and it's
yeah,
there's always going to be. That's why we have in this country concepts like the free press and free media and free speech and the right to assemble and all of these things. These are a recognition of natural rights that we need in order to counter the corrupt establishment. I mean, the, the founders of this country, in their genius, they understood this. And I mean, I think it was Washington who said, and I'm paraphrasing, that government is a fearful master that has to be chained down by the bounds of the Constitution. And I mean, that's what the whole constitutional system is all about. We're supposed to be a government of laws and not men. It's not supposed to be the arbitrary control of those in the high positions of power. It's supposed to be an objective body of law that exists outside of their ability to manipulate it, right? That's what belief in God is all about.
yeah.
It's an external power that created the universe, and that man can't, who's imperfect and who's an image of God, can't go in and start manipulating and you through his imperfect lens the way things are. The nature of things are outside of our ability to manipulate. It's only our ability to perceive it, and if we do perceive it, to expose it and identify it, right? The thing that gave man. I know I'm getting theological here a little bit, and I am,
Sure.
because I'm actually writing a book right now about God, and I'm about to kind of
Did
put
you
it to.
interview him?
Oh yeah, right, exactly. He came to me through my radio.
Okay.
No, no, but the thing that gave man a soul, and that made us created in the image, men and women, by the way, because the book of Genesis says men and women, not just men. So men and women are equal. The thing that gave us a soul was when God commanded Adam to name the creatures of the earth using language. He would name in other words, he identified existence and gave it a name. He identified reality. That was the moment when reason was born, the ability to understand God's creation and how it worked. And that was what, at that moment, we obtained a soul. We became an image of God. But yet we're not God. Only God is God. We're not perfect. We only see things through a cloudy lens. But in that context, we are capable of reason. We are capable of identifying truths. And that's what makes us different. That's what has propelled us forward as a civilization, our ability to do that.
Up
Anyway, I don't
until
mean to
now.
I'm getting kind of, as I said, a little bit
Well, I
theoretical
mean,
here.
maybe you can argue that the downfall started in 1961 with the anti-prayer decisions, school prayer
Oh,
decisions.
absolutely. You know something? Yeah, you mentioned that. I was just a little kid at the time, but I remember that because I remember that it was none other than President John F. Kennedy who came out publicly against that and said, this is going to change America and not for the better. I seem to remember that he made a quite a
Yeah,
few.
he was right about that, and it's interesting that even as lapsed a Catholic as he may have been, enough of it rubbed off
Yeah.
that he could see, no, we're heading in the wrong direction. Uh, I mean, a
Oh,
lot of
he was.
good is being
I
turned
believe that
forward.
even though putting aside his personal life, he was a truth teller, and I think that
Yeah.
in terms of his orientation, he was a good Catholic. I believe. And I don't know if you've ever heard, not to get into a topic, speaking of Kennedy, and maybe we're talking
Oh,
about that
with his
with Joe
little
losing his
relative
election.
getting stomped by
Yeah,
Markey.
by Ed Markey. He delivered a speech, and you can look at this. It's actually on the Kennedy Library website,
Hmm.
and I quoted from it pretty heavily in my book about assassinations. I did a book called Assassination in America, where I go over assassination conspiracy theories
Oh,
that involved either outright assassinations or attempted assassinations. And I go all the way from Alexander Hamilton up to the Clinton body count. And I did cover the more famous ones like Kennedy. And one of the things I discovered is that Kennedy delivered this speech, again, available on the JFK Library website, to a group of journalists, where he talked about the insidious influence of secret societies on America, and that a lot of things happening in government is done through subversion, and that it was the job of journalists to expose this and examine it, and that it's happening all around.
hmm.
And some have speculated that this was the beginning of the end for him, and I don't know that, but
Could be.
who knows? We don't know. But
But in terms of the brand failing, as
I
it
mean,
did with
yeah, with
former
Joe.
congressman. Now, what was the deal with that? What's the inside scoop that
Well,
somehow?
I think that Joe Kennedy just got way over his head if he thought he was going to take on Ed Markey, because Ed Markey, I may not agree with his politics. He's probably more further left than Kennedy, but he is no slouch. He's very, very, and he is a shark. He knows how to take on. That's why Scott Brown decided not to run against him. Instead, he went up to New Hampshire and ran against Gene Shaheen and lost.
Yeah,
But you just don't mess with Markey. I mean, he's very, very good, and you could watch him. And the debates were fascinating. He just ripped Kennedy from stem to stern in those debates. He made him look like who he is, which is basically a kid. And I mean, Kennedy's a fine fellow and all, but he just was no match for Ed Markey. And Markey showed that he was just this empty suit. I mean, he didn't really, he's just kind of a rubber stamp for every liberal cause there is. And while Markey may be a liberal, he at least is originating these things. He can go relatively deep in certain areas, and he's actually accomplished a lot of things, even if I don't like those things.
that's right.
Right. The point is, he's very, very good at what he does. So that is the end of the Kennedy dynasty. I
I think
mean,
so.
oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
the
They're
magic is
over.
gone.
Oh, I mean, look, the Kennedys were in power since before both you and I were born, right? It goes back to when the old man was ambassador to Great Britain in the late
Right.
30s. And they've been in power ever since. Certainly, Massachusetts has always been their little fiefdom. It's been their, kind of their castle. And he was Joe Kennedy, that is the young Joe Kennedy. I think he was probably the best that generation had. He could walk and chew gum at the same time. In other words, no, he was not a bad guy, but and his end is the end. They're never going to come back. They're done.
Well, I thought, okay, but they are grooming, and tell me what you think about this. They're grooming Caroline's son.
Oh, he's a complete dolt.
Well, okay,
He's not going anywhere.
I thought the magic was gone
It's gone.
when
He's
she came out as this Valley girl when she was interviewed because she
Yeah.
expected to be appointed senator from New York.
Oh, it was terrible. I mean, she was completely embarrassed, and it was this privilege approach. She ended up being appointed by Obama to as an ambassadorship to Japan, and they did come out for Obama early on over Hillary,
Yeah.
which helped Obama. But you're right. I mean, that was a terrible exposure for them. And the son seems like a nice kid, but he's not going anywhere. No, they're done.
Okay, well, I mean that's really encouraging. Um,
I hate to say it, but yeah, I mean,
well, no, I mean, and the reason I say that is I thought when she came across as stupid, and despite her privileged background, I mean, nothing happened.
no,
That
she was
that
horrible.
that would have given pause to people, which it did. And then there were articles I read in a couple of places that Joe Kennedy didn't really have a chance against Markey, but why the heck was he supported by Nancy Pelosi?
Well, I mean, he's the establishment. The way they position themselves is that Kennedy was the establishment Democrat, and Markey
But
went in
Markey's
with
been in office for 100
yeah, but
years.
Markey went in with AOC and with the Green New Deal, and
Yeah,
he helped her author that, and he went with the squad, and they have some energy in the state, and I know people who were involved in that and who viewed Kennedy as kind of old establishment. He really didn't. This two, the Kennedy base is old blue-haired ladies, right? And there's fewer and fewer of them every
I
year.
didn't think it was still live anymore.
Exactly. So the base is diminishing for Kennedy, and I just think they're done. I mean, I don't see. I mean, I certainly don't think he's ever going to come back. I mean, they're just it's over. The Kennedy dynasty is dead, just like Trump ended the Bush dynasty and the
Yeah.
Clinton dynasty. Now the Kennedy dynasty is over. Fortunately, these people hang around like vampires. We never get rid of them. So
Well,
I
and
mean,
it probably didn't help that there was all this other assorted nonsense that was going on with this or that relative
oh
dying
yeah, I
of
mean all the
overdose.
crazy, and then they had Patches Kennedy from Rhode Island completely disgraced himself, and he had to leave, and he drove his car into the Capitol building. I mean,
Yeah.
he was a complete mess. So yeah, I mean those things didn't help either.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that's good news.
I think it is. I mean, I feel sad a little bit because as a Massachusetts citizen growing up in the state, like most people in this state, I have like a love-hate feeling for the Kennedys. It's sort of interesting. Maybe it's because they've been so dominant in our culture here for so long.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they had a much longer run than the Brown family in California, that I think almost single-handedly destroyed the state.
Yeah, but the Kennedys also, they were glamorous.
Yeah.
They were, they had a cultural aspect to them. I don't think the Browns really had that.
No.
The Browns were good politicians, maybe, but the Kennedys, it was more than that. It was like a movie star quality. So there's a mythology. There's Jackie Kennedy was brilliant at creating that. She created the whole Camelot thing in an interview she gave a few weeks after the assassination, where she said that JFK, every night before bed, he would listen to the album Camelot. And that was where that came from.
Is that true?
It probably is. Why not? I don't know. I mean, who knows? She was a very savvy media person, anyway.
Yeah, I
So
have to hand her that. I mean,
yeah, I mean, so I think that, and she was very different than her public image, by the way, and most people in this state know that.
yeah.
But anyways, they had a cultural element to that family, and I mean, you always felt in awe when you met with any of them, and we've all met various members from time to time, just even on the street.
And
And
are
so
there
they,
there still random Kennedy relatives roaming around?
I mean, I saw Joe Kennedy over at the supermarket, and he didn't. I think he knew who I was too, because this was right after I ran, and he didn't really want to see me. He was like looking into his cell phone,
Yeah.
but but and he looks like a 16-year-old kid. If you see him, I mean,
Hmm.
but he was very privileged, and he was shot into that position with this huge machine, and I don't see them. I think they're done.
Wow. So some things do change.
Yeah, and this is certainly an example of one of them. That's for sure.
But I think with the fall of the Bushes, to kind of wrap up this topic of the fall of the dynasties, I was very surprised that all the negative stuff started coming out in a torrent. All the corruption of his family going back to day one,
Yeah.
and then the revelation, not to those that knew better, but to many people, that Laura was pro-abortion, the daughters were, and there was never really a hint of anything you and I would call conservative in that entire family.
No. I mean, they were Rockefeller Republicans.
Yeah, lace
Although
curtain.
I think that George W. had a few conservative scruples, but not many.
Well, I mean, he was the best of the bunch, ironically.
Right. That's right.
Uh,
But they were Eastern Seaboard liberal establishment, if there ever was.
yeah.
I mean, the old man was head of the CIA. You can't get more liberal establishment than that.
Well, and then
The swamp.
yeah, and then of course his father was Hitler's banker.
That's right.
So
Prescott Bush. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yep.
So
Along with the Kennedy father, I may
yeah,
point out.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
So
well, that's something that's a whole, I mean, big subject, that these people all supported either the Nazis or the Bolsheviks, and there's been some interesting books written about that by Hoover Institution fellow Anthony Sutton. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
okay. Yeah.
He wrote Wall Street and Hitler and Wall Street and the Bolsheviks, both excellent and both highly well documented pieces of research.
All right.
Anyways, Mike, so we're sort of reaching the end of the conversation here. So, what else is in your mind briefly?
I'm just sort of watching the trends here. The apparently this gun ownership thing is going through the roof. I've read in some sources that there's 2 million recent gun purchasers that never had guns before.
Probably spurred on by the move to defund the police, I would gather.
Yeah, and I just don't know, other than their usual technique of projection, which you mentioned, how the Democrats get around this thing, that they were just about encouraging this rioting behavior, these Soros-based DAs and so on and so forth. The chickens are coming home to roost. In a just completely unrelated thing, there's a company we work with. The guy and his wife happen to live in the Portland area. They're getting out of Dodge.
Yeah, people are fleeing that city in droves.
Yeah.
I don't know. The media won't show what the federal courthouse looks like in Portland.
Yeah.
It's been trashed. I mean,
Well,
it's and it's burning.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very sad story. Portland used to be the city of roses, and that term has not been used, as far as I know, for 40 years or more.
Mm.
And it started accumulating the scum of California. I mean, there's no other way to say it. Moved up there. And now you have a state that I characterize as, well, you know what Portland's about. You go to the Pacific Coast, it's economically depressed, beautiful scenery. I mean, economically depressed to the point where my wife and I were there a few years ago, you'd look at a menu in a restaurant, you'd think it was your father taking you somewhere in 1958. I had to do a double take. The prices were, and then of course in the eastern part of Oregon, they want us to see.
Right, exactly, and they want to join Idaho, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's a failed state
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah.
So anyway, Mike, but let my listeners and viewers know where they can read your excellent column.
Okay, the health stuff is always on healthnewsdigest.com. And I occasionally put stuff out in other places, but most of it is health related. I get to have the politics here on Charles' show, but pretty much I stick to writing about health related issues, but maybe with some point of view on that.
Oh, absolutely. Anyways, but and by the way, I should mention as a program note that later today, I'm having on this program a beautiful woman, Joy Villa.
Oh,
she's the woman who wore those beautiful gowns with the Trump logo and Make America Great Again at the Academy Awards. She's come out with a new book and she's coming on the show. So,
oh, that's great.
That should be fun.
You get the good guess.
Okay.
All
All right, Mike. So thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.